Why did everyone stop talking when she stepped onto the firing line? The morning sun over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado burned against the chrome barrels and sand-colored targets. A faint breeze carried the smell of gunpowder and ocean salt, the scent of nerves, sweat, and failure. Sergeant Alex Mercer adjusted her ear protection and lifted her rifle with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times and failed nearly every single time. This was her 21st qualification attempt, 3 straight weeks of failure. To the instructors, she was a name on the discharge list. To the students, she was the cautionary tale, the soldier who looked the part but couldn't deliver when it mattered. The nickname had started quietly in the barracks and spread fast, Shaky. Her trigger hand trembled just enough to ruin a perfect shot. It wasn't dramatic, just a whisper of instability, barely visible unless you were watching closely. But here, among elite candidates training to be SEAL snipers, a whisper was enough to scream incompetence. And yet she kept showing up, every morning. Same quiet focus, same ritual adjust stance, control breathing, align sights, and the same result, wide misses that made even recruits look better. People had stopped offering advice. They stopped believing. Even the range officers had grown polite in their pity, handing her scores with a look that said, "We've seen this before, and it never ends well." But no one knew what she was hiding. Not the instructors. Not the other students. Not even the ones who whispered about how she must have pulled strings to get here. They didn't see the jagged white scar that sliced diagonally across her right palm, hidden beneath the glove she never removed. A scar she'd earned 18 months ago in a place that officially didn't exist, during an operation that never appeared in any logbook. And that scar, that piece of lightning frozen in flesh, was why her career, her future, and maybe her sanity hung on this last qualification attempt. The line went hot. She raised her rifle, settling into the stance she had drilled for months in rehab. Her breathing slowed, inhale, exhale, hold. The first shot cracked. Low and right. Second, high and left. Third missed the entire target backer. From the tower above the range, Colonel William Harrison lowered his binoculars and exhaled quietly. He'd seen it all, the naturals, the grinders, the ones who broke under pressure. But Sergeant Mercer, she didn't fit any of those. Her failure wasn't random. It was patterned, predictable, too consistent to be pure incompetence. And that bothered him. Harrison wasn't even supposed to be involved in this training cycle. He was here as an observer reviewing SEAL sniper qualification protocols for an upcoming evaluation. But 3 days ago, something about Mercer had caught his eye. She looked like someone trying not to shoot straight, or someone fighting her own body. He'd pulled her file last night, using clearance levels the instructors didn't have. What he found didn't match what he saw on the range. Decorated combat record. Flawless field evaluations. Commendations for tactical awareness, adaptability, and marksmanship under stress. But now she couldn't hit a target at 50 meters. It didn't add up. Through the binoculars, Harrison zoomed in on her grip and froze. Her right hand looked wrong. The tension wasn't just inexperience, it was avoidance. Her fingers twitched around the pistol grip as if the weapon burned. When she reloaded, her glove shifted, and sunlight caught something pale beneath the fabric, the edge of scar tissue. He focused harder. A diagonal line. Raised thick. His pulse quickened. He'd seen scars like that before, nerve damage, shrapnel trauma, the kind of injury that changes everything about how a shooter holds a weapon. He didn't need another shot to confirm what he already knew. Every time she fired, she was gripping pain. By the time Mercer cleared her weapon, the Ranger Master was already writing fail across her clipboard. "Mercer," he sighed, voice edged with exhaustion. "We've been over this. You're gripping too tight. You're jerking the trigger, you're anticipating recoil. I don't know what else to tell you." "Yes, sir." Her tone was steady, professional emotion buried deep where no one could reach it. "Sir, I—" The Ranger Master waved her off. "At this point, I'd start looking at reassignment paperwork. You've had every extra session we can offer." She nodded, understood. That was when a deep, deliberate voice cut through the range noise. "Sergeant Mercer." The tone alone made both of them turn. Colonel Harrison was walking down from the tower, his expression unreadable. The Ranger Master straightened immediately. "Sir, Colonel, you're not." "Relax," Harrison interrupted, "just observing." He stopped in front of Mercer. "That hand," he said simply, "how long ago?" Mercer froze. She didn't look up. 18 months, sir." "And you're still shooting right-handed?" "Yes, sir." There was a long pause, the kind that made seconds stretch into minutes. "Pack your gear," Harrison said finally. "Meet me at Building 7, 30 minutes." "Yes, sir." The Ranger Master blinked. "Sir, that's outside." "Not your concern," Harrison said quietly, turning away. As he walked, he pulled out a secure phone from his pocket and dialed a number that wasn't listed in any official directory. When the voice on the other end answered, his words were simple. "I think I found one of yours, and someone needs to explain why she's been set up to fail." 30 minutes later, Mercer stood in front of Building 7, a plain metal structure at the far edge of the training complex. The kind of building everyone ignored, the kind that wasn't supposed to exist. She hesitated before opening the door. Inside, the space smelled like gun oil and dust. Stacks of old training crates lined the walls, but in the center sat a single table, 3 chairs, and Colonel Harrison waiting. "Close the door," he said without looking up. She obeyed, standing at attention. "At ease, sit down, this isn't disciplinary." She sat, posture rigid. Harrison studied her for a long time. 18 months ago," he began, "you were medevaced from Afghanistan after an IED strike during a vehicle interdiction. Multiple surgeries to reconstruct your right hand. Official record says you were cleared for light duty." He didn't have notes in front of him. He'd memorized it. "The operation you were on doesn't exist in any file," he continued. "The unit doesn't exist. Standard black level cover. So tell me, why would someone with your record volunteer for a marksmanship course designed to expose exactly what you can't do anymore?" "I volunteered because I wanted to prove I could still do my job," Mercer said evenly. "To who?" She hesitated. "To myself." He leaned back. "No, Sergeant, you're here because someone is running an assessment, and you're the subject." Before she could respond, the door opened again. A woman stepped in, mid-40s, civilian clothes, a DIA badge around her neck. Her presence filled the room like pressure before a storm. "Colonel," she said with a polite nod. "Dr. Alina Wright, Defense Intelligence Agency, Personnel Assessment Division." "Doctor," Harrison greeted, his tone cool. "You mind explaining why one of your people is being destroyed on my range?" Wright smiled, thin and professional. "Sergeant Mercer, how are you feeling?" Mercer's instincts prickled. "Fine, ma'am." "Good," Wright said, setting a tablet on the table. "Then let's be honest. You weren't sent here to qualify. You were sent here to be evaluated. Your performance was monitored under controlled conditions to determine whether your injury has rendered you unfit for return to field operations." "By setting her up to fail," Harrison snapped. "By observing how she adapts," Wright corrected smoothly. "In the field, there are no instructors to hold your hand. We needed to see if she'd recognize her own limitation and adjust. She hasn't." Mercer's pulse pounded in her ears. "You wanted me to fail." Wright met her eyes. "We wanted you to learn. Failure was part of the design." "That's not evaluation," Harrison said coldly. "That's cruelty dressed up as science." "It's realism," Wright said simply. In combat, realism is all that matters. The silence that followed was suffocating. "So what now?" Mercer asked. "Now," Wright said, "you have one final qualification attempt tomorrow. You can keep doing what you've been doing and fail again, or you can make a different choice. The question is, do you even know what that choice is?" She stood, gathering her tablet. "You have 16 hours. Pride or results, Sergeant. Choose carefully." Then she was gone. The door closed softly behind her, leaving only the sound of Harrison's quiet exhale. He studied Mercer's hands, folded neatly on the table. "Can you shoot left-handed?" She hesitated. "I've been practicing, but not under evaluation." "You've got nothing to lose," he said quietly, "except maybe your career. But if you keep trying to be the person you were before that injury, you'll lose that anyway." He stood. "The question isn't whether you can go back. It's whether you can become someone better." That night Mercer sat on her bunk long after lights out, staring at her right hand. The scar gleamed faintly under the dim glow of the barracks lamp, ugly, uneven, and real. It wasn't just her hand that had changed. It was everything. For 18 months, she'd been chasing the ghost of the soldier she used to be, the one who could shoot clean, move fast, and never doubt. But that version of her had died in the desert the day the IED tore through her team's Humvee. She remembered the faces. Lieutenant Miller, Staff Sergeant Taylor, and Whiskey, the CIA operative who had dragged her bleeding from the wreckage. Only 2 of them had made it home. Faruqi the ghost had escaped that day, the high-value target they were supposed to capture, the man responsible for dozens of attacks, the man who had killed her friends. And he was still out there. That was what this was really about. Not qualification, not pride, redemption. She flexed her right hand again. Pain flared, sharp and electric. Then she looked at her left, steady, ready. Her jaw set. Tomorrow she would stop trying to be who she was and start proving who she could become. She hadn't slept. The clock on the barracks wall ticked past 200, and Sergeant Alex Mercer was still sitting on the edge of her bunk, boots unlaced, staring at the rifle case leaning against the wall. Her right hand ached, the kind of deep, electric pain that came from nerves that never fully healed. But that wasn't what kept her awake. It was the thought that maybe, just maybe, Dr. Wright was right. Maybe all this time, she hadn't been fighting the injury, she'd been fighting herself. 3 weeks of humiliation. 3 weeks of failure. 3 weeks of watching her dreams slip through her fingers, while everyone around her stopped looking at her like a teammate and started seeing her as dead weight. And now she knew it had all been deliberate. She'd been an experiment, a controlled collapse. Her failures had been studied, cataloged, and measured by people who wanted to see how long it would take before she broke. Wright had called it evaluation. Mercer called it cruelty wrapped in protocol. But the one thing they hadn't calculated was what she would do once she knew the truth. She stood, opened the rifle case, and pulled out her weapon. The Mk-11 sniper system gleamed under the dim light, precision machined steel, smooth and cold, like an extension of her own heartbeat. For the first time in 3 weeks, she shifted it into her left hand. It felt strange, unbalanced, like shaking hands with a stranger who already knew too much about you. But there was something else too, something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. No pain, no nerve fire screaming through her palm, just silence. She adjusted her stance, rolled her shoulders, sighted down the scope. Her left index finger brushed the trigger. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. And for the first time since Afghanistan, possible was enough. Outside, the base was silent, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. The air was cold and salt-heavy, rolling in from the Pacific. Mercer grabbed her gear and slipped out. If she was going to prove herself tomorrow, she couldn't wait for permission. She needed to train, really train, one last time. The auxiliary range was half a mile away, tucked behind the motor pool, and technically off-limits at night. But Mercer had spent enough years in covert operations to know that off-limits was just another word for try not to get caught. She moved like a shadow, her boots silent on the gravel, the moonlight glinting faintly on her rifle. When she reached the range gate, she expected it to be locked. It was. Someone had already been there. And someone was waiting. Couldn't sleep either. The voice came from the shadows near the range shack, calm, measured. Mercer instinctively shouldered her rifle before she recognized the outline. Colonel Harrison. He was sitting on a crate, coffee mug in one hand, a faint smile in the dark. Relax, Sergeant. If I wanted to end your career, I'd have done it before midnight. Mercer lowered her rifle. You shouldn't be here, sir. Neither should you, he said evenly, but here we are. He set his mug down beside him and gestured toward the range. You planning to shoot? She hesitated, then nodded, left-handed. Good, he said simply. Then you're about to meet someone who's been waiting to see you. A figure stepped out from the shadows behind the range shack, tall, lean, wearing civilian clothes and the kind of calm that only came from decades of experience. Sergeant Mercer, the man said, offering a hand. Frank O'Neill, former SEAL, spent the last 15 years teaching operators how to stay in the fight after injuries take away what they thought defined them. Mercer shook his hand carefully. His grip was strong but not testing. Colonel didn't mention company. Harrison smirked. Didn't want you backing out. O'Neill's here to help. Mercer frowned. With what? O'Neill gave her a look that was both kind and cutting. With accepting that your right hand's done leading the dance. He lifted a small black case onto the bench beside her rifle. When he opened it, the contents gleamed under the moonlight: custom pistol grips, ambidextrous charging handles, modified trigger assemblies. Everything you need to make the left-handed transition complete, he said. But it's not the gear that matters, it's the mindset. He studied her, reading her silence like a dossier. You've spent 3 weeks trying to prove you can still shoot the way you used to. That's not strength. That's denial. Mercer bristled. With respect, sir, you don't know me. Oh, I know you, O'Neill said softly. I've trained 100 like you. The ones who refuse to admit that change doesn't mean defeat. He motioned toward the firing lane. Show me what you've got. The night air was sharp and still as Mercer took her position. She adjusted the rifle, now fitted with O'Neill's modified grip, and raised it to her left shoulder. It felt wrong. Everything was mirrored. Her instincts screamed that her body was backward. But O'Neill's voice cut through her doubt. Forget perfect, focus on possible. She exhaled, aimed, and fired. The shot landed wide. Again. Another missed. Again. She fired until the rifle's rhythm began to match her breathing, until the pain that had haunted her right hand faded into a distant memory. Hours passed in fragments of focus and failure and tiny victories. Each shot fell closer to center, each reload smoother. By 300, sweat clung to her neck, her muscles burned, and the moon hung low behind drifting clouds. She loaded her final magazine. O'Neill stood behind her, silent now, watching, measuring. Mercer exhaled. The shot cracked, a clean, centered hit. Then another. And another. By the time the magazine clicked empty, 10 holes marked the silhouette's center mass, tight, disciplined, precise. Mercer lowered her weapon, breath shaking. O'Neill broke the silence first. You're not good yet, he said bluntly, but you're better than you were an hour ago, and that's enough to build on. Mercer turned toward him. You think I can pass tomorrow? I think, O'Neill said, picking up his case, you can stop trying to prove you're unbroken and start showing that you're rebuilt. He handed her one of the modified pistols from the case. A black MK-23 with a left-hand trigger modification. "Take it," he said, "and when you shoot tomorrow, don't think about them. Don't think about the ones you lost. Just think about breathing." She took the pistol, the metal cool in her palm. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. O'Neill smiled faintly. "Because someone helped me once." He limped slightly as he turned toward the darkness. "East Berlin, 1973. Took a bullet through my knee. Doctor said I'd never run again. I proved him wrong." He looked back at her. "We all get broken, Sergeant. The trick is making the cracks part of your aim." Then he was gone, swallowed by the night. When the first light of dawn touched the range, Mercer was still there. Her left shoulder throbbed from hours of unaccustomed recoil. Her fingers were raw from reloads, but her mind was quiet, that dangerous, focused kind of quiet that comes right before a test you've already decided to pass. As she cleaned her rifle, she realized something. For weeks, she had been trapped in the idea of before the injury, before the mission, before the IED. But there was no before anymore. There was only now. And in the now, she was ready. She packed her gear, slung the rifle across her back, and started the walk back toward the barracks. The base was waking up, the metallic hum of trucks, the whistle of morning drills. The other candidates would be rising soon, gearing up for qualification day. Most of them wouldn't even look at her. Some might whisper. A few might smirk. Let them. By this time tomorrow, the whisper would change. When she reached her barracks, Lieutenant Reynolds was already outside, stretching by the steps. The early sun cast long lines across the asphalt, painting him in sharp military perfection. He saw her and raised an eyebrow. "You're up early, Mercer." "Didn't sleep," she said. "Can't imagine why," he said dryly. "Heard yesterday didn't go well, again." She stopped in front of him, eyes steady. "You'll want to be on the range early today, Lieutenant." "Oh." She slung her rifle off her shoulder, resting it casually against her leg. "You won't want to miss the show." Reynolds frowned, unsure if she was joking. "You switching up your luck today?" "Not luck," she said quietly, "just hands." She walked past him before he could respond. Inside the barracks, she stripped off her gloves. Her right palm gleamed under the fluorescent light, pale, ridged, jagged with memory. She touched it once, then pulled the glove back on. The scar wasn't shame anymore. It was reminder. The person she'd been died on that Afghan road. The one who'd rise on this firing line tomorrow would be someone else. Someone who'd learned that sometimes you don't win by fighting pain. You win by changing the hand that holds the trigger. Outside, the sun rose over Coronado, bright, unflinching, unforgiving. The kind of light that shows everything you've been hiding. Mercer stood at the window, watching the day begin. She felt the weight of the MK-23 in her left hand. It felt strange, but it also felt right. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be trying to prove that she hadn't changed. Tomorrow, she'd prove that change was her strength. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Sergeant Alex Mercer stepped onto Range 7 for what everyone believed would be her final humiliation. The Pacific breeze was cool but heavy with that San Diego salt air, clean, crisp, sharp enough to sting her lungs. She'd been awake for 24 hours, but she'd never felt more alert. The range stretched ahead, 60 yards of quiet judgment and waiting eyes. Instructors stood behind their clipboards. Students gathered in clusters, pretending not to watch. And high above, Colonel Harrison leaned against the observation railing, arms crossed, face unreadable. Mercer took her place at firing position 2. Her weapon case clicked open, revealing O'Neill's modified MK-23 pistol and the newly adjusted rifle, both customized for left-hand operation. She heard the whispering before she saw the looks. "Is she serious?" "After 21 fails." "She's still here." "Let them talk." They didn't know what she'd done last night. They hadn't seen the hours of sweat, the repetition until her left arm trembled, the way O'Neill had stood silently behind her until every shot landed true. She set her rifle on the stand and began her pre-checks. The routine steadied her breathing. Safety. Bolt. Sight alignment. Magazine. Her hands, her left hand, moved with confidence that hadn't existed the day before. For weeks, she'd been haunted by the thought that her injury had taken everything that made her a soldier. Now, for the first time, she realized it hadn't taken her will, only her comfort. And comfort was overrated. Mercer, the ranger master called, clipboard in hand. His tone was somewhere between irritation and pity. "You're up first. Last qualification attempt." "Yes, sir." He gave her a look, part disbelief, part warning. "Make it count." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He gestured toward her rifle. "You planning to shoot that, left-handed?" "Yes, sir." That earned a few quiet chuckles from the other students. Even Lieutenant Reynolds, who usually carried himself with calm professionalism, couldn't hide the smirk tugging at his mouth. "You've been shooting right-handed for 3 weeks, the ranger master said. "Why change now?" "Because right-handed doesn't work anymore," she said simply. The ranger master opened his mouth to argue, then glanced up at Colonel Harrison. The colonel gave the faintest nod. "Your call," the ranger master muttered. "Line hot in 60 seconds." Mercer knelt briefly, pressing her palm to the dirt. She'd done this before every deployment, a silent ritual, grounding herself to something real before stepping into chaos. When she stood, the air felt sharper, the world narrower. The voiceover tone of her own thoughts whispered like a narrator in her head. 3 weeks of failure. 3 weeks of pain. Every bullet was a lesson. And every scar was a reminder. Today isn't about who I was. It's about who I am now. Shooter ready. Ready. On my mark. Mark. She raised the rifle in one fluid motion. Left shoulder, left eye, left trigger finger. The movement felt alien and perfect. The first shot cracked across the range. A puff of dust burst from the target's center mass. The ranger master looked down at his tablet. His eyebrows flickered upward. Second shot. Another hit. Third. Dead center. She didn't think, she just moved. The rhythm took over: breathe, sight, press, follow through. Her heart slowed to match the cadence of her shots. The recoil flowed through her body exactly as O'Neill had drilled into her. Breathe. Fire. Adjust. The target counter ticked upward. 10 hits. 12. 15. By the time the last shot echoed through the morning air, the only sound left was the metallic click of her empty magazine and the faint, stunned silence of 30 people realizing what they'd just seen. "Cease fire," the ranger master called, his voice quieter than before. "Clear and safe your weapon." She complied, methodical. Chamber open, safety on, magazine out. Every motion deliberate, confident. When she stepped back, the ranger master walked to the target sheet, his tablet syncing to the hit sensors. He looked down, blinked twice, and exhaled. Then he turned toward the group. "Sergeant Mercer, final qualification attempt." A long pause. "Score 87%. Qualification standard 75. He looked up, his tone steady now. "Sergeant Mercer, you pass." The silence that followed was electric. For 3 weeks, these same people had watched her fail, had whispered, had written her off. And now they were staring at the person they thought they understood, watching her break every expectation in a single morning. Someone in the back murmured, "Holy hell." Even Reynolds looked stunned. His smirk was gone. Up in the tower, Colonel Harrison didn't smile, but his jaw relaxed, the smallest sign of satisfaction. He picked up his radio. "Range control, hold all lanes. I want everyone assembled on the deck." The Ranger Master hesitated but complied. All shooters, weapons safe, gather on the firing line. Within minutes, 30 elite candidates stood in a loose semicircle. Harrison descended the tower stairs, his boots echoing against the metal steps. When he reached the dirt, he moved with the authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. "What you just witnessed," he said, "is worth a conversation." He gestured toward Mercer, who still stood at her lane, weapon slung. 3 weeks this Marine failed every single qualification. You all saw it. You all judged it. He let the words settle like dust. Show of hands, who thought she'd pass today? No one moved. Even Hannah Wyatt, the quiet petty officer who'd shown the only hint of kindness during those weeks, stayed still. "Right," Harrison said softly, "because you all saw what looked like weakness." He turned toward Mercer. "Show them your hand." She hesitated, then removed her glove. The sunlight caught the pale scar running from the base of her thumb to the edge of her pinky, a violent, healed reminder of what it cost her to still be here. The reaction was instant, a few gasps, one muttered curse. "This," Harrison said, pointing to the scar, "is what failure really looks like. It's not about missed shots or low scores. It's what happens when life takes a piece of you and you refuse to accept that you're different afterward." He looked around at the group. 18 months ago, Sergeant Mercer was caught in an IED blast during a classified operation. 2 teammates died. She didn't. Her right hand, her dominant hand, was nearly destroyed. The fact that she can hold a weapon at all is a medical miracle. The fact that she just qualified as a sniper left-handed is something else entirely. Reynolds shifted, uncomfortable. "Sir, we didn't know." "No, you didn't," Harrison said. "And that's the point. None of you ever do. Out there in the field, you'll work with people carrying injuries you can't see, physical, mental, emotional. And you'll judge them by what you see on the surface, the same way you judged her." He looked back at Mercer. "The difference is she adapted, you just assumed." For the first time, Mercer let herself breathe. Not the quick, shallow breaths of tension, but a deep, grounding inhale that felt like freedom. The range, the same place that had broken her for 3 weeks, suddenly looked different. Reynolds stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sergeant, I owe you an apology." She met his eyes. "For the things I said, for assuming," he paused, "you earned that score." Mercer nodded once. "We all fail, Lieutenant. Some of us just take longer to figure out why." He smiled faintly, humility softening the edges of his pride. Harrison watched the exchange, then turned toward the Ranger Master. "Mark her file accordingly, qualified left-handed shooter, effective immediately." The Ranger Master blinked. "Sir, left-handed qualification isn't standard for this course." "It is now," Harrison said. "The standard is proficiency, not preference." The Ranger Master nodded. "Understood, Colonel." Harrison looked back at Mercer. "You've got 1 hour. Dr. Wright wants to see you." Mercer stiffened. "Yes, sir." "She'll have questions. You'll have answers. Keep your head clear." He leaned slightly closer. "You proved you can adapt. Now prove you can hold your ground." As the others dispersed, Petty Officer Wyatt approached quietly. She didn't say much, just handed Mercer a fresh magazine pouch and said, "You'll need this." Mercer looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Thanks." Wyatt nodded. "For what it's worth, I always thought there was more to you than those scores." Mercer chuckled softly. "Guess I just needed a different grip." Later in the locker bay, she sat alone. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of realization. 3 weeks ago, she'd come here trying to prove she hadn't changed. This morning, she'd proved that she had, and that it didn't make her weaker. Her scarred right hand twitched as if remembering the pain. She looked at it for a long moment before flexing it slowly. "You're still part of me," she whispered, "just not the part that leads anymore." Outside, the California sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the dawn chill. From a distance, the sound of gunfire echoed from another range, the rhythm of soldiers chasing perfection. Mercer shouldered her rifle and walked toward Building 7. Whatever Dr. Wright had planned next, she was ready. Because she finally understood what O'Neill had meant when he said the cracks could become part of your aim. She wasn't just healed. She was rewired. And sometimes, the strongest aim doesn't come from the steady hand. It comes from the one that's learned to shake and still pull the trigger anyway. The corridor to Building 7 always smelled the same: steel, bleach, and silence. It wasn't part of the official base layout, but everyone knew it existed. You just didn't ask questions about what happened inside. Sergeant Alex Mercer walked down the narrow hall, rifle case in hand, boots echoing on the concrete. The metal door at the end was unmarked except for a small black card reader. When she swiped her ID, the lock clicked with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. Inside, the lighting was softer than she remembered. Dr. Alina Wright was already seated at the table, tablet open, glasses perched low on her nose. Beside her stood a man Mercer hadn't seen before: square-shouldered, close-cropped hair, suit that screamed government. Wright didn't look up when Mercer entered. She just gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, Sergeant." Mercer set down her rifle case and sat. The man's eyes never left her. Cold, analytical, the kind of gaze that stripped people down to their patterns and probabilities. Wright finally spoke. "Congratulations on your qualification." Mercer stayed silent. "I'll admit," Wright continued, tapping her tablet, "you surprised us. I expected adaptation eventually, but not that quickly. Impressive." "Didn't realize I was still part of an experiment," Mercer said evenly. "Oh, you are," Wright said, "just not the same one anymore." That made Mercer look up. The man stepped forward. "Commander Drake, Joint Special Operations Command." She didn't respond, didn't salute, didn't blink. Drake didn't seem to mind. "You were evaluated for 2 reasons," he said. "First, to determine if you could still function at operational capacity. Second, to see if you could be reactivated for something off-book." Mercer frowned. "Reactivated? I'm not cleared for field work." "You weren't," Drake said, "until this morning." Wright slid the tablet toward her. On the screen was a classified operations header. Project GRAVMIND. Below it, grainy satellite imagery, a desert compound, vehicles, heat signatures. "Recognize this?" Wright asked. Mercer leaned closer. The image hit her like a shockwave. She knew that place, the ridgeline, the wadi cut through the terrain like a scar. "Afghanistan," she whispered. "Sector Echo 7, that's where." "Where your team was hit," Wright finished softly. "Yes." Mercer's pulse quickened. "That compound was destroyed. We called in air support." Wright shook her head. "We hit decoys. The real command cell relocated within hours. The man responsible for that ambush survived." Mercer's chest tightened. She didn't need to hear the name. She already knew it. Faruqi. A name that lived like a ghost behind her scar. Drake watched her reaction closely. "You're the only one left from that op who saw him up close. You're the only one who can id him with certainty." "Why me?" she said quietly. "You have facial recognition, satellite mapping." Drake's voice sharpened. "Because he doesn't exist in databases. He's a phantom, but he remembers you, and if the chatter we've intercepted is correct, he's been looking for you." Wright's tone softened. "He's not after your unit, Sergeant, he's after you." Mercer stared at the image. The compound flickered on the screen, heat signatures shifting like embers in an old fire. She could still hear the blast in her memory, the deafening roar, the smell of burning fuel, the screams. "Why tell me this now?" Drake folded his arms. "Because you're going back." The room fell silent. Mercer blinked. "You're joking." Wright's expression didn't change. We wouldn't bring you in if we were. You've proven you can adapt physically. The question now is whether you can adapt emotionally. Emotionally, Mercer laughed bitter hollow. I buried half my team there. You think that's something you adapt to? Drake leaned forward. You're not being asked to move on. You're being asked to go back. And this time you're not there to capture. You're there to finish it. The words hit her like a bullet she didn't see coming. Finish it, she repeated. Drake nodded once. We've tracked Faruqi's network for months. The intel points to him using that same region again, building a new hub in the ruins of the old one. The same place he destroyed your team. Mercer's throat tightened. You want me to relive that? No, Drake said coldly. We want you to end it. The air in the room thickened. The only sound was the hum of the projector. Wright studied her silently, then asked, How's your hand, Sergeant? Mercer looked down, functional. Pain. Sometimes. Then use it, Wright said. Pain is memory, and memory is intelligence. Mercer's jaw clenched. You're asking me to weaponize trauma. I'm asking you to control it, Wright corrected. The difference is discipline. Harrison's voice suddenly echoed from behind her. He'd entered quietly, unnoticed. And the difference between control and denial, he said, is honesty. Mercer turned. You knew about this. He nodded once. I was briefed this morning, the operation sanctioned. You'll deploy under my oversight. Her voice dropped. You think I'm ready? He studied her. No one's ever ready, but some people stop waiting for permission. They briefed her for 2 hours, satellite feeds, comms intercepts, mission profiles. The target site, the ruins of the old compound in Echo 7, now rebuilt as a fortified communications relay. Objective, confirm Faruqi's presence and extract intel from recovered hard drives. Secondary objective, neutralize hostiles if capture fails. Team small, 4 operatives, 2 local assets. Codename Operation Mirage. When the briefing ended, Drake closed his folder. You deploy in 48 hours, training isolation until then. No contact outside this building. Mercer nodded, forcing composure. Understood. Wright leaned forward. You'll need to make peace with one thing before you go. What's that? That you're not going there for revenge. Mercer met her gaze. Then what am I going for? Wright's voice softened, almost a whisper. Closure, but closure doesn't always come clean. Hours later, Mercer stood outside the building. The base was quiet again. The ocean wind tugged at her uniform, cold and salt-heavy. She stared at the horizon, at nothing and everything at once. The voice in her head, calm, tired, steady, spoke again, like narration over a slow, cinematic shot of the waves breaking against the pier. They say scars are proof of survival. But survival isn't the same as living. Sometimes you keep breathing just to finish what you started. Her scar itched beneath the glove. She thought about O'Neill, about his words. We all get broken. The trick is making the cracks part of your aim. Maybe this mission wasn't punishment. Maybe it was precision. Maybe this was the only way to find out who she really was, the woman who'd survived, or the one who'd come back to make survival mean something. That night she trained alone again. The armory was empty, save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. She set up targets and ran silent reloads until her muscles burned. Then she switched to close-quarters drills, left hand steady, movements economical, quiet. Every motion was deliberate. Every breath a mantra. Left hand, left eye, new balance. Between sets, she caught her reflection in the steel wall, a soldier reborn from the wreckage of her own failure. She almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not the wounded sniper. Not the humiliated trainee. Someone else entirely. Someone dangerous again. At 300, she opened her locker and found something that hadn't been there before, a sealed envelope. No name, no insignia, just a single phrase written on the flap. "You'll need this." Inside was a folded piece of paper, a photograph. 4 people. Her old team, smiling alive, and scrawled across the bottom in Harrison's handwriting. "They'd want you to finish it, but not for them, for you." She sat down hard on the bench, the photo trembling in her left hand. For months, she'd carried guilt like armor. Now it felt like a weight she could finally set down, if only she finished what she started. Outside, the dawn began again, another California sunrise burning through marine haze. The voiceover inside her mind softened to a whisper. Maybe redemption isn't something you find in forgiveness. Maybe it's something you earn in the places that broke you. Not to erase the past, but to prove it didn't own you anymore. She folded the photograph carefully and slid it into her chest pocket. Then she reached for her weapon, her left hand wrapping around the grip with quiet, practiced control. Tomorrow she'd be on a plane. 2 days from now, she'd be back in the desert where it all began. And this time, she wasn't going there as the broken one. She was going there as the one who learned to fight with the scar, not despite it. The desert looked exactly the same. That was the first thing she noticed. From 30,000 feet, through the small oval window of the C-130, Sergeant Alex Mercer stared down at the endless ocean of tan and bone-white earth. The same ridgelines, the same scars in the sand where convoys had once crawled like ants toward objectives no one remembered. She hated how familiar it felt, like time hadn't passed at all, like the desert had been waiting for her. The engines roared, vibrating through her seat and her ribs. Opposite her sat the rest of the team, 4 figures in desert camo, faces half hidden behind dust masks. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Cade, Communications and Overwatch. Specialist Rosa Delaney, Medic and Drone Operator. Sergeant Taz Leung, Demolitions and Breach. And finally, Captain Ethan Wolfe, Field Lead, the kind of man who looked like he'd been carved from stubbornness itself. No one spoke much. You didn't on missions like this. The silence wasn't awkward, it was ritual. Mercer checked her rifle again, though she'd done it 4 times already. Left hand configuration perfect, bolt smooth, trigger crisp. Her gloved fingers brushed the scar on her other palm, a habit she couldn't unlearn. Across from her, Captain Wolfe studied her in silence. When he finally spoke, it was without preamble. "You were here before, weren't you?" She looked up. "Yes, sir." "Same valley?" "Same one." He nodded once. "You lost people?" "3," she said softly, "including my co." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly, not judging, just calculating. "Then you know the ground better than anyone. You take point once we're wheels down." She nodded. Taz smirked faintly beside her. "So you're the one who came back from the dead." Mercer didn't smile. Not yet. They touched down on a makeshift strip near Camp Razor, an unmarked outpost surrounded by dunes and rock outcroppings. Heat slammed into them as they disembarked, dry, suffocating, immediate. Within minutes, sweat coated everything. Dust clung to skin and gear like a living thing. Local liaison Farid, a lean Afghan tracker, met them at the perimeter. He spoke little English, but his eyes were sharp and fast, a man who'd survived this land by reading it like a language. "Compound," he said, pointing southeast. 2 hours, many watchers, bad ground." "Bad ground?" Wolfe asked. Farid nodded grimly. "Old ghosts." Mercer's stomach tightened. She didn't need a translation. She knew what that meant. They rolled out in 2 modified Humvees, engines growling against the sand. The sky was a brutal blue, the kind that made everything feel exposed. Mercer sat shotgun, eyes scanning the ridgelines. Every shadow looked like a memory, every ridge like the one where her team had burned. The hum of the engine faded into the rhythmic voice of her thoughts. That internal narration that had kept her alive in darker days. Coming back isn't courage. It's consequence. You think you're returning to finish a mission, but what you're really doing is looking for the pieces you left behind. They made camp near dusk behind a broken ridge. Mercer climbed to a higher perch with her rifle and glassed the valley. The ruins were still there. A cluster of crumbled concrete and half-buried steel, what was left of the compound from the ambush. Her breath hitched when she saw it, a faint plume of smoke rising from the far end. Activity. Movement, she murmured into her comms. Thermal shows 3, maybe 4 heat signatures. Could be more inside. Copy, Wolf replied. We'll go in pre-dawn, keep eyes on. She adjusted her scope, heart pounding in that quiet, steady rhythm soldiers know, the rhythm between fear and focus. Through the lens, she saw something glint. A figure stepped out from a doorway. He moved with a limp, broad shoulders. The sun caught a line of metal at his wrist, a watch. Her pulse spiked. Zoom, Alex, she whispered to herself, tightening focus. The man turned slightly. His face came into partial light. And for a moment she couldn't breathe. It was him. Faruqi. The same eyes, the same calm arrogance. The man she'd last seen through a haze of smoke and blood as he walked away from her burning convoy. She whispered into her mic, target confirmed. The channel went silent for a beat. Say again, Wolf asked. Target confirmed, it's him. Hours passed in preparation, gear checks, calm frequencies, silent planning. The night air was cold enough to sting. At 400 they moved. The desert before dawn was a strange, suspended thing. No color, no sound, just movement and heartbeat. Mercer led the way, Farid beside her. Her boots moved through sand and memory with equal weight. When they reached the first perimeter wall, Wolf signaled halt. Delaney drone up, he whispered. The small quad lifted into the darkness, its lights blacked out. The feed glowed faintly on her wrist screen. 3 guards. 2 sentries at the door. Faruqi's heat signature inside the central building. It was almost too perfect, like bait. Mercer felt it in her gut, something off. Wolf nodded slightly. I know, but command wants confirmation. We move slow. They breached quietly, Taz cutting through rusted metal like it was paper. Inside, the air reeked of fuel and dust. Mercer moved left, sweeping corners with smooth precision. Her left shoulder bore the weight of her rifle easily now, the muscle memory of nights spent training alone. Through the comms, Delaney's voice whispered, thermals shifting, heat signatures moving fast. Then static. A split second later, the world exploded. The blast threw Mercer into a wall. Her ears rang. Sand and debris rained down like shrapnel. Taz, Delaney. Wolf's voice was muffled through the static. I'm up, Taz shouted. Delaney's hit. Mercer rolled to cover, vision blurred. Her left arm throbbed, but the rifle was still in her grip. Smoke filled the corridor. Shadows moved through it, fast, deliberate, organized. Ambush, Wolf roared. Contact east side. Rounds tore through the walls. Sparks danced in the dark. Mercer fired, smooth and steady, left-handed precision cutting through the chaos. Each shot was instinct, not revenge, not rage, just clarity. Taz pulled Delaney back. I've got her. Farid. No response. The gunfire ebbed for a moment. Then Mercer heard it, a voice in accented English, echoing through the hall. Sergeant Mercer. Her blood froze. You came back, the voice said, calm, almost amused. I was told you would. Faruqi. Wolf met her eyes through the smoke. He's in the comms room. You take flank, we'll cover. She nodded once. The hallway felt endless. Each step was a heartbeat, each heartbeat an echo of the past. She rounded the corner and saw him, standing beside an overturned table, rifle slung carelessly across his back. He wasn't what she remembered, older, scarred, but his eyes still cold, still sure. "Last time I saw you," he said, "you were dying." Mercer raised her weapon. "You first." He smiled faintly. "You came all this way for closure." "I came for the truth," she said. He tilted his head. "And what truth is that?" "That you're not untouchable." She fired. He dove for cover, but not fast enough. The round grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Gunfire erupted again, close and deafening. She advanced, firing in bursts. The scar in her right hand burned, phantom pain flaring through nerves that no longer controlled anything. Faruqi slammed into the far door, vanishing into the dust outside. She followed. The desert dawn broke as they spilled into the open, light blinding, golden, violent. She saw him running toward a truck. She fired once more. This time the round found him. He dropped. She approached slowly, weapon steady. Faruqi was breathing shallowly, blood dark against the sand. He looked up at her, not fear, not anger, something else. Resignation. "You think this ends it?" he rasped. She stared down at him. "No, it ends me." He smiled weakly. "Then you still don't understand." "What?" "That you were never my enemy. You were my message." Before she could respond, he coughed once and went still. The horizon burned with sunrise as silence returned to the valley. Her comm crackled. "Mercer's status." She pressed her mic. "Target neutralized, we're clear." Wolf's voice came through, tired but alive. "Copy, extraction in 10. She stood there for a moment, staring at the body. The man who had haunted her every dream, now just another name crossed off a file. But the closure she expected didn't come. Only quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a mirror. Revenge isn't a finish line. It's a circle. You walk it long enough, and eventually, you end up back where you started. Alone, staring at the same dust, wondering what you really won. She holstered her rifle, exhaled slowly, and looked toward the ridge where the old compound once stood. For the first time, it felt smaller. Like it finally belonged to the past. They exfiltrated at dawn, 2 wounded, 1 casualty. No celebration, no cheers, just silence and dust. As the helicopter lifted off, Mercer looked down at the wreckage growing smaller beneath her. Wolf leaned toward her through the headset. "You got your man, you okay?" She watched the desert fade. "I think so." He nodded. "Good, because Command's gonna want to debrief the second we land." She almost smiled. They always do. The wind roared through the open door, whipping her hair across her face. The sun climbed higher, burning away the haze. And in that golden light, she finally felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not victory. Not peace. Just release. The weight she'd carried since that day, gone, piece by piece, scattered into the same sand that had once buried her. Back on base, as she stepped off the helicopter, Colonel Harrison was waiting. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her, really looked. "Faruqi." "Confirmed," she said quietly. He nodded. "And you?" "I'm done." He studied her face for a long moment. Then softly, "No, Mercer, you're finally starting." She didn't understand then what he meant. Not yet. But she would. War has a sound. And when it stops, silence feels wrong. The hum of engines, the weight of gear, the coded chatter in your ear, the smell of cordite and sweat. Then one day it's gone, and you're left with the echo of who you were. That was the silence Sergeant Alex Mercer carried home. When the plane touched down at Naval Air Station North Island, the world felt muted. Sunlight hit her face through the window, the same kind of sunlight she'd seen over the desert. But it didn't feel warm. It felt like memory. The others disembarked quickly, Taz limping on a crutch, Delaney pale and stitched, Wolf expression unreadable. They nodded their goodbyes, silent promises that none of them would keep. War had taught them something few people ever admit. You don't always come back together. You come back changed. Mercer's quarters were clean, too clean. No sand, no smell of oil or sweat. Just emptiness. Her rifle case sat in the corner, still closed. For a long time she didn't touch it. Instead, she sat on the floor back against the wall, boots still on, and stared at her hands. The left one steady, calloused. The right, scarred, pale, and trembling faintly in the quiet. She pressed her thumb along the old wound, tracing the ridges like reading a story written in pain. The voice in her head, that inner narration she could never silence, whispered again. You finish the mission. You cross the border. You come home. But sometimes, the war doesn't know how to stop following you. The next morning, the base felt strange. Too normal. Laughter near the mess hall, joggers on the track, cadets saluting crisp and clean. Everything moved like clockwork, while she walked like a ghost in daylight. When she reached the after-action debrief room, Colonel Harrison and Dr. Alina Wright were waiting. 2 chairs, 1 folder, no smiles. Take a seat, Harrison said quietly. Mercer obeyed. Wright tapped the folder. You neutralized Faruqi, recovered 2 hard drives, no civilian casualties, minimal losses. On paper, it's a perfect mission. On paper, Mercer echoed. Wright tilted her head, but... Mercer hesitated. He said something before he died. Harrison frowned. What? That I was never his enemy, that I was his message. Wright leaned forward, meaning. I don't know. Wright smiled faintly. You do, you just don't want to say it. Mercer's jaw tightened. Wright's voice softened. He wanted you to see something about yourself. That revenge isn't resolution, it's repetition. You kill the ghost and find out it's still inside you. Harrison shot her a look. Doctor. No, Mercer said, she's right. The words felt heavy coming out. When I pulled the trigger, I thought it would feel like winning, but it didn't. It felt like breathing underwater, like I was alive but not free. Wright nodded slowly. That's the part they don't teach you to survive. She paused. Do you know why we sent you back there? Mercer's eyes flickered up. You wanted your closure, your intel, your test. No, Wright said. We wanted to see what you'd do when you realized the enemy wasn't out there anymore. She let that sink in. Now you've learned, Wright continued. Adaptation isn't just physical, it's emotional. You didn't go back to prove you could kill again. You went back to prove you could feel again. Mercer exhaled slowly, eyes stinging. What if I don't like what I feel? Wright smiled gently. Then you're finally honest. After the debrief, Harrison walked her out. The corridor was quiet, just the sound of boots and breathing. You did good work, he said. Mercer nodded. Doesn't feel like it. He stopped, hands clasped behind his back. You think closure is peace. It's not, it's clarity. He looked at her, eyes softer now. You faced what most people spend their whole lives avoiding, who you really are after the noise stops. She looked away. And who's that? He shrugged. Someone who survived without forgetting why. He handed her a small envelope. You're cleared for extended leave, 30 days. After that, you can decide what comes next, training, reassignment, or discharge. No pressure. She took it quietly. Thank you, sir. He nodded once. You earned it. That night she drove out to the coast. The ocean was calm, silver and endless beneath the moonlight. She sat on the hood of her truck, salt air biting at her skin, waves whispering below. For a while she just listened. The ocean had the same rhythm as her rifle breathing. Inhale, exhale, release. It was strange how nature and war, sometimes spoke the same language. She took the photograph from her chest pocket, the one of her old team. Their faces smiled up at her, frozen in a world that didn't exist anymore. "Finished it," she whispered, "but it still doesn't feel finished." She let the photo rest on her lap, wind tugging at its edges. "You think revenge will close the book," her mind narrated softly. "But sometimes it just turns the page. And you realize the story wasn't about them at all. It was about who you became trying to find them." In the days that followed, she tried to live normally. Grocery runs, jogging by the marina, the taste of coffee that didn't come from a ration pack. But quiet was its own kind of battlefield. Every sudden noise drew a flicker of instinct. Every silence begged for purpose. Once at a red light, she found herself scanning rooftops, searching for snipers who weren't there. Another time, she caught herself counting exits in a restaurant, calculating fields of fire out of habit. You don't stop being what the world made you. You just learn to exist between triggers. A week later, a letter arrived from Frank O'Neill, the old SEAL who had trained her that night before her final test. The handwriting was messy, deliberate. "You did what you had to do, Mercer. Doesn't mean it'll make sense right away. You learned to shoot with the other hand, good. Now learn to live with the other heart. The one that doesn't beat for missions anymore, but for what comes after." She read it 3 times before folding it away. His words echoed louder than gunfire ever had. 2 weeks later, she found herself at a VA outreach event, mostly vets and their families, the kind of quiet crowd that didn't talk about what they'd seen. She hadn't planned to stay long. But when a young recruit, 19 maybe, nervously approached her, she paused. "You're Sergeant Mercer, right?" he asked. She nodded. He hesitated. "They told us about you in training, about how you failed every test and still qualified. I just wanted to ask how you didn't give up." She smiled faintly. "I did a few times." "Then how'd you get back up?" She looked down at her hands. "I stopped trying to be who I was, started learning who I was becoming." The recruit nodded slowly, the kind of understanding that only half lands until life explains it later. As he walked away, Mercer caught her reflection in the window beside her. She didn't look like the soldier from before. And for the first time, she was okay with that. That night she went to the range. Not for qualification, not for anyone watching. Just her. The lights were low, the air thick with that familiar metallic scent. She laid out her gear, loaded a single magazine, and took her stance. Left hand steady. Right hand relaxed. The shot rang out clean, centered. And in the stillness that followed, she smiled. Sometimes you don't need the world to know you've changed. Sometimes you just need to hear the sound of it. In one quiet, perfect moment where everything finally makes sense. As she packed her rifle, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass, the faint gleam of her scar visible even under the glove. It wasn't ugly anymore. It was proof. Proof she'd been broken. Proof she'd rebuilt. Proof she'd learned that failure isn't the end, it's the forge. She turned off the lights, the echo of that single shot still lingering in the dark. And as she stepped into the night, the ocean breeze carried her whisper into the quiet. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. ChatGPT said. Perfect, continuing seamlessly. This is part 7, approximately 1,500 plus words, of your cinematic, emotionally driven military narrative about Sergeant Alex Mercer, the SEAL sniper who's learned to live with her scars and now faces a new kind of battlefield, rebuilding others. Tone, grounded, heartfelt cinematic realism, a story of rebirth through mentorship, compassion, and quiet strength. Think American Sniper meets Megan Levy and the Outpost's final redemption acts. Cinematic Story Part 7. Some battles aren't fought with rifles. They're fought in silence, in the small moments when someone else's pain looks too familiar to ignore. That's where Sergeant Alex Mercer found herself 6 months after coming home. The base had moved on without her. Missions came and went, new recruits replaced the old, and the rhythm of military life continued fast, precise, indifferent. But she didn't fit inside that rhythm anymore. So she built her own. Every morning before sunrise, she drove to Range 19, a quiet section of the base few used. The sand there was coarse, the air still, and the world hadn't quite woken up. It was the only place she felt calm. She wasn't training for war anymore. She was training for something harder, peace. Colonel Harrison had been the one to suggest it. "You've got something to teach," he'd said, "and not everyone needs a perfect soldier. Some need to see a human one." At first she refused. "I'm no instructor," she told him. He'd smiled faintly. "Neither am I, but someone once taught me how to keep walking when the noise stops. You can do the same." Now she stood on the dusty range with a small group of recruits. 4 men, 2 women, each carrying invisible wounds. Some had scars you could see. Some didn't. She didn't ask which were which. She didn't have to. You can always tell by the way people breathe when they're trying not to remember. "All right," she said, voice firm but calm. "This isn't about hitting bullseyes. This is about breathing again." The recruits exchanged uncertain glances. Mercer picked up her rifle, the same one she'd used in Afghanistan, its matte finish worn smooth from years of handling. "You breathe wrong, you miss. You think wrong, you panic, you die. Simple chain reaction, so we break it right here." She demonstrated left-hand grip, controlled exhale, slow squeeze. The shot cracked. Center hit. One recruit, Petty Officer Lane, frowned. "Ma'am, how are we supposed to focus when all we can think about is what's waiting outside these gates?" Mercer looked at him. "Then stop trying to escape it. Bring it here. Turn it into something you can control." She gestured to the target. "Every time you pull that trigger, you're not killing something out there. You're reclaiming something in here." She tapped her chest. Lane stared unsure, then nodded slowly. Over the next weeks, she worked with them quietly. No drills barked, no yelling, just rhythm, breathe, aim, control. Some days they shot well. Some days they fell apart. And every time, Mercer stayed calm. Because she understood what falling apart felt like. One afternoon, during weapons maintenance, one of the younger trainees, Private Elise Ramos, approached her. "Sergeant," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" Mercer nodded. "They told us what happened to you, the hand, the tests, the mission." Mercer said nothing. Ramos hesitated. "How'd you know when it stopped defining you?" The question lingered in the air. Mercer thought about it, really thought. "When it stopped being the first thing I tried to hide," she said finally. Ramos looked at her scarred glove, then back at her. "Does it still hurt?" Mercer smiled faintly. "Only when I forget why it's there." That night, Mercer stayed on the range after everyone left. The sun dropped behind the horizon, painting the sky in deep gold and blood-orange light. She loaded a single round, took her stance and breathed. Her scar itched beneath the glove, but she didn't fight it. Pain, she'd learned, wasn't the enemy. Fear was. The rifle cracked. The echo rolled out into the desert, swallowed by silence. For a long time she didn't move. "You spend years learning to fight," her inner voice whispered. "Then the rest of your life learning to stop." The next morning, Harrison visited her on the range. He leaned on the observation rail, watching her instruct. When she finished, he approached quietly. "You've got a gift." She wiped her hands on her fatigues. "I've got a story, that's all." He shook his head. "Stories teach better than orders." He handed her a small envelope, official seal. her name printed in clean black ink. "Command wants to reinstate you as a tactical trainer," he said. "Permanent position, specializing in marksmanship rehabilitation, for wounded operators mostly." She hesitated. "You want me to teach people who are broken?" "No," he said softly. "I want you to teach people they are." She looked down at the envelope, fingers tracing the seal. A year ago, she would have torn it up. Now she tucked it into her pocket. 2 weeks later, the new program began. 8 recruits, 12-hour days, long hours under the California sun. Each story different. Each scar unique. Mercer taught them not to fight their pain, to train it. "You'll never shoot the way you used to," she told them one afternoon. "That's not the goal. The goal is to shoot like you can now." They learned to adapt left hand, modified stances, altered breathing patterns. And for every adjustment they made, Mercer saw herself again, the woman who'd once believed failing meant ending. Now she knew better. One day after class, she found Ramos sitting alone on the bleachers, staring at her rifle. "You good?" Mercer asked. Ramos hesitated. "I keep missing, my hands shake, I think I'm not built for this." Mercer sat beside her. "Neither was I." Ramos frowned. Mercer, you're a sniper, you." "Failed," Mercer interrupted gently. "A lot." She looked at the younger soldier. "You don't get good by pretending not to fall apart. You get good by learning how to stand after you do." Ramos blinked back tears. "You really think I can make it?" Mercer smiled. "You already did. You showed up again today." Ramos exhaled, nodding slowly. "Thank you." As Mercer stood to leave, Ramos said quietly, "I saw your scar once. It's not ugly, it's honest." Mercer froze for a second, then smiled without turning around. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me." That night the base was still. The stars stretched overhead, bright, sharp, endless. Mercer sat outside the armory, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. The sound of the recruits, laughing faintly in the barracks, drifted through the air. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because they weren't as loud anymore. Wright visited a few weeks later. Her civilian clothes were crisp, her posture perfect. "I see you've been busy," she said, scanning the recruits on the range. "Busy's good," Mercer replied. Wright smiled faintly. "You know, when we first evaluated you, I wasn't sure you'd make it through the psychological recovery." Mercer chuckled. "Neither was I." "What changed?" Mercer thought about it. "Someone told me once that failure's not the end, it's the forge." Wright nodded. "You learned." Mercer shook her head. "I'm still learning." Later, after Wright left, Harrison joined Mercer again on the observation deck. He handed her a file, red cover, classified markings. "What's this?" she asked. "Something new. Civilian transition program for veterans. You'd be perfect for it." Mercer raised an eyebrow. "You're trying to get rid of me." Harrison smiled. "Trying to spread you around." She laughed softly. "You ever stop recruiting people?" He looked at her, expression warm. "You ever stop inspiring them?" They stood there in companionable silence as the recruits fired below, rhythmic, synchronized, deliberate. Each shot echoed like a heartbeat. That evening she stood alone again on the range, watching the last light fade. Her scar caught the dying sun, glowing faintly like a thread of gold across her skin. She thought about everything, the failures, the pain, the loss, the desert, the mission. It all felt like one long breath she'd finally exhaled. "Maybe strength isn't about never breaking," her voiceover whispered softly. "Maybe it's about choosing what to do with the pieces when you do." She holstered her weapon and looked up at the sky, wide, endless, alive. A new kind of mission awaited her now. Not one written in briefings or orders, but in the quiet redemption of helping others find their way home. When she left the range that night, The wind carried the faint echo of laughter from the trainees' quarters. And for the first time, she didn't look back. Because for once, she wasn't leaving something behind. She was walking toward something new. The desert hadn't changed. 2 years later, Sergeant Alex Mercer stood at the same ridgeline where it had all begun, where it had all ended, and felt the wind press against her face like a memory that refused to fade. The air smelled of dust and distance. The same horizon stretched wide and endless. But this time, it didn't look like a grave. It looked like forgiveness. She wasn't here on a mission. No rifles, no kill orders, no ghosts to chase. She was here with 6 new recruits, fresh faces from the rehabilitation program she'd helped build. Each of them carried scars of their own, some visible, some not. Her job was to make them warriors again. It was to remind them that they still were. "All right," she called, her voice steady but soft against the wind. "Range discipline stays the same. Watch your footing on the slope. Sand shifts fast out here." The recruits nodded, following her lead as they spread out across the ridge. She moved among them like she belonged to the landscape, calm, deliberate, quietly confident. One of the younger soldiers, Reed, glanced toward her. "Ma'am, this where it happened, the ambush." She paused, watching the horizon. "Yes." Reed hesitated. "Why come back here?" Mercer looked at him, not with sadness but with understanding. "Because the only way out is through," she said. "You face the place that broke you until it stops holding power over who you are." Reed nodded slowly, letting the weight of that truth settle in. As they began setting up targets, Mercer found herself drifting a few steps away, standing at the edge of the ridge alone. The wind was stronger here, carrying whispers through the stones, almost like voices if you listened too long. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw them again. Miller, Taylor, and Whiskey, the ones who hadn't made it home. Not as ghosts, as memories. They weren't angry anymore. They weren't even waiting. They were just there. "Some people leave the world," her inner voice whispered. "But they never really leave you. They live in the lessons you teach. The way you breathe. The way you refuse to quit." When she opened her eyes, the desert shimmered in the distance, alive, untamed, and infinite. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't looking at the place that took everything from her. She was looking at the place that gave everything back. "Sergeant Mercer," a voice called from behind. She turned. It was Captain Wolfe, her old mission lead. He looked older but calmer too, civilian clothes now, a scar above his brow she hadn't noticed before. "I heard you were out here," he said. "Didn't believe it until Harrison sent me a photo." She smiled faintly. "You still following orders?" He chuckled. "Old habits." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the recruits in the distance. "You built something good here," Wolfe said. "They talk about your program back home, call it Project Dignity." She laughed softly. "That wasn't my name for it." "It fits," he said. "You turned failure into foundation. Not many can do that." Mercer looked down at her gloved hands. "I didn't do it alone." Wolfe nodded. "None of us do." They shared a long moment, 2 survivors, standing in the same dust that had once defined them, now finally at peace with it. As evening crept in, the desert cooled. The recruits had finished their drills, laughter echoing faintly across the ridge. Reed approached her again, smiling shyly. "Ma'am, thought you might want to fire the last round." He handed her his rifle. Mercer hesitated, then took it. The metal felt warm from the sun, solid, familiar. She loaded a single round and stepped to the edge. Her recruits quieted, watching her. They'd heard the stories. The woman who failed every test, who learned to shoot with her other hand, who turned her scars into her aim. But they hadn't seen her shoot, not once. Until now. She breathed in slow. The wind brushed against her cheek, a whisper from the past, a promise from the present. Left hand steady, right hand relaxed, heart still. She sighted the target, 300 meters out. The desert went silent. And then, crack! The sound rolled through the valley, echoing off the stones, carried by the wind for miles. When the echo faded, Mercer lowered the rifle and exhaled. Reed checked the scope monitor, dead center. The recruits broke into quiet applause, not loud, not forced, just respectful. Mercer smiled, handing the rifle back. Now you see, it's not about how many times you fail. It's about how long you're willing to keep trying until the noise turns into balance. Reed nodded, eyes shining. Balance, he repeated. After they packed up, the recruits started the slow walk back toward the convoy. Mercer stayed behind just for a minute. The last light of day stretched across the sand, gold turning to red, red fading into dusk. She took off her glove and looked at her scar, the mark that had once ended everything, now glowing softly in the sunset. It didn't hurt anymore. She thought of Dr. Wright, of Harrison, of O'Neill, of all the hands that had lifted her when she couldn't lift herself. And quietly, to no one in particular, she said, "Thank you." The wind carried it away. Back at camp, Wolf joined her by the fire. The recruits were asleep, the sky glittering with 1,000 indifferent stars. "You ever think about what's next?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "This is next." He nodded, poking the fire with a stick. "You ever miss it, the fight?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not enough to go back." "Why not?" She stared into the flames. "Because the fight's not out there anymore." He looked at her. "Where is it?" She placed a hand over her chest. "Right here." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need words. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a night wind moved through the stones, whispering across the empty expanse. Mercer leaned back, watching the stars. She spent so many years chasing survival that she'd forgotten what living felt like. Now in this quiet, she finally remembered. Maybe this is what victory really is, her voice narrated softly. Not medals, not missions. Just the peace of knowing you faced yourself and didn't look away. The next morning, when the sun broke over the horizon, Mercer was already awake. She stood by the ridge, hands in her pockets, watching the first light wash across the desert floor. The recruits would wake soon. Another day of training, another lesson. But this moment, this silence before the day, belonged to her. She thought about the word that had followed her from the beginning. Fail. It had been her label, her scarlet letter. Now it was her foundation. She smiled quietly. Failure hadn't been her ending. It had been her introduction. The beginning of everything she'd become. She turned away from the sunrise and began walking back toward the camp. Her steps were light, her heart calm, her purpose clear. The camera, if this were a film, would stay on the horizon for a long moment, catching her silhouette growing smaller against the blazing gold of morning. Her voice would fade in one last time, soft, certain, resolute. They called it failure. But failure was never the end. It was the moment I learned to rebuild. One breath, one trigger pull, one scar at a time. And maybe that's what strength really is. Not the hand that never shakes, but the one that learns to steady itself anyway. The wind rose again, carrying her final words into the open sky. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The screen would fade to white. The sound of a distant rifle echoing one last time. A heartbeat disguised as a gunshot. Then silence.